What goes through the mind of someone in their final hours? Some accept their fate with an almost chilling calmness, while others lash out in desperation. From reincarnation rituals to orchestrating risky escapes, these are the most disturbing last 24 hours of inmates facing the harshest punishment. James Edward Smith was born in Kentucky, though the exact date of his birth remains unclear. He was deeply involved in voodoo practices and identified as a voodoo priest. In 1983, Smith carried out an act of theft at the Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston, Texas. During the theft, he took the life of Larry Don Rojas, the district manager, even though Rojas followed his instructions and handed over the money. Smith was caught shortly after when Rojas's colleagues and nearby workers chased him down and restrained him. He claimed responsibility for 6 other ritualistic acts, but there was no real proof, only his unsettling words. His mother testified about his deep belief in voodoo and black magic, describing a man consumed by dark, obsessive thoughts. Despite the lack of solid evidence for his other claims, the court focused on what they could prove. Smith was found responsible for Rojas's passing and received the most severe sentence under the law at the time. On his final day, Smith made an unusual request for his last meal. He asked for a specific type of dirt called Raya Kunda, which he believed would help with his reincarnation through a voodoo ritual. Since dirt was not considered food, prison officials denied the request and instead offered him yogurt. Throughout the day, Smith remained calm, spending most of his time watching television and sleeping. He wore the standard white prison uniform and did not ask for any special accommodations. In his final statement, he maintained his innocence, saying,
"I am not the one responsible. I did not take anyone's life."
He also spoke about his views on the justice system, urging people to wake up to the reality of executions. As he finished speaking, he smiled, winked, and said,
"Hare Krishna,"
a well-known Hindu mantra. The procedure began at 12:19 a.m., and he took his final breath at 12:31 a.m. While James sought spiritual meaning even in his final meal request, the next individual took a more rebellious approach. Aileen Wuornos was born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Aileen Wuornos faced a difficult childhood marked by instability and neglect. She endured a difficult childhood, abandoned by her mother and raised by a strict grandfather. Aileen's grandfather reportedly mistreated them horribly, and by the age of 11, she was engaging in inappropriate exchanges just to get basic necessities like food and medicine. Between 1989 and 1990, while living in Florida, Wuornos was responsible for the passing of 7 men. She claimed she acted in self-defense against unwanted advances. Her method involved luring men before fatally harming them at close range. She was arrested on January 9, 1991, and 1 year later, in January 1992, convicted for the unalivement of Richard Mallory. In later proceedings, she admitted to the other cases and expressed a desire for spiritual peace. She received the capital punishment and was sent to Broward Correctional Institution in Florida. As her final days approached, Aileen Wuornos showed more and more unusual behavior. She insisted that prison staff were tampering with her food, claiming they were adding dirt and other substances to make her sick. She also believed they were trying to push her into a breakdown. Wuornos spoke of being tormented by sonic pressure, saying it felt like her head was being crushed. She described an environment designed to wear her down. Harsh searches, painfully tight handcuffs, loud noises at all hours, constant window checks, weak water pressure, and a damp, mildewed mattress. She was convinced that guards were mocking her and treating her unfairly. Despite her claims, a panel of mental health experts determined she was fully aware of her circumstances and fit to face her sentence. In her final hours, Wuornos withdrew into silence. She barely spoke to prison staff or fellow inmates, keeping to herself. Unlike many others who request elaborate last meals, she asked for nothing special, just a simple cup of coffee. When the moment arrived, she faced it with a cryptic farewell.
"Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, And I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back, I'll be back.
Her words left many wondering about her state of mind in those final moments. On October 9, 2002, her sentence was carried out, and her remains were respectfully cremated. At her request, the song Carnival by Natalie Merchant was played at her farewell, arranged by a close friend from her younger years. But the next case, he gambled with his fate, his last, desperate shot at freedom. Ponchai Kamau Wilkerson was born in 1971 in Houston, Texas. On November 28, 1990, during a string of thefts, he and an accomplice entered the Royal Gold Jewelry store. After briefly leaving twice, Wilkerson returned and, without warning, fatally shot jeweler Chung Myong-yi at close range. In July 1991, a jury found him guilty and sentenced him to the highest penalty under Texas law. His conviction was upheld in 1994, and all later appeals were denied. Wilkerson's time in high-security confinement was anything but quiet. On Thanksgiving Day, while the prison hummed with holiday distractions, he and 6 others set their escape plan into motion. Hidden in the recreation yard, they worked in silence, sawing through the fence with a smuggled hacksaw. Each stroke brought them closer to freedom, until the watchful eyes of the guards caught movement in the dark. In an instant, alarms blared, officers swarmed, and their bid for freedom was crushed before it even began. But Wilkerson wasn't one to accept confinement without a fight. In February 1998, he and fellow inmate Howard Guidry took a 57-year-old guard hostage inside the Terrell unit. For 13 nerve-wracking hours, the prison held its breath as negotiations stretched on. No one knew how it would end, whether in bloodshed or surrender. Finally, the guard was released unharmed, but the message was clear. Wilkerson wasn't just an inmate. He was a problem the system couldn't contain. Even on the day of his final reckoning, he refused to go quietly. He barricaded himself in his cell, forcing officers to use gas and brute force to drag him to the sentence chamber. He rejected his last meal, left no instructions for his remains, and when offered the chance for final words, he said,
"This is not a capital punishment case."
Even in his final moments, Wilkerson refused to submit. After the procedure was carried out, Wilkerson stunned everyone one last time. As his body lay still, something unexpected happened. He spit out a universal handcuff and leg restraint key, measuring about 1.5 inches. Prison officials were left shocked and baffled. Where did he get it? How long had he been hiding it? And, more importantly, what had he been planning? To this day, no one knows the answer. But what happens when a person's fate seems sealed long before they ever stand trial? The next shocking case reveals just that. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Raymond Riles was born in 1950 in Harris County, Texas. He worked as a truck driver, but his family noticed that he often displayed unusual behaviors. He would pray in unfamiliar languages and call himself by different names. On December 13, 1974, Raymond Riles and Herbert Washington went to John Henry Motors, a used car dealership in Houston, demanding a refund for a car Washington had purchased. When the owner, John Thomas Henry, refused but offered to fix it, tensions escalated. Riles pushed Henry and shot him from behind. Despite his injuries, Henry remained conscious as Riles stood over him, demanding money. After taking a roll of cash, Riles and Washington fled the scene. In 1976, Riles was convicted of a serious charge related to John Henry's passing and was sentenced to the harshest penalty allowed by law. Riles' mental health challenges were evident during his trial, where he had outbursts, including targeting the judge. Experts testified that he suffered from paranoid delusions, schizophrenia, and psychosis, but the jury rejected his insanity defense. Raymond Riles' mental state unraveled as the years passed, pushing him to the edge of desperation. His final sentence had already been delayed multiple times due to concerns about his deteriorating condition, but in 1985, just a day before his sentence was scheduled, his distress reached a breaking point. Locked in his cell, Riles set it ablaze, the flames consuming everything around him, including his own body. By the time guards extinguished the fire, he had suffered burns over 30% of his skin. The signs of his unraveling had been there all along. Just the day before, fellow inmates had watched him crawl through the dirt, eating grass, his mouth moving as if whispering secrets to the earth itself. He muttered to unseen forces, calling upon Mother Earth and Allah, lost in a world of his own making. Over the years, courts repeatedly ruled that he was not mentally fit for his sentence to proceed. In April 2021, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his original sentence, stating that his mental health history had not been properly considered during his trial. On June 9, 2021, after spending more than 45 years in confinement, Riles was resentenced to life in prison. This made him the longest-serving person in the United States to have his sentence changed. In the next case, we'll meet a man who turned his final moments into a joke campaign, only to surprise everyone at the very end. Patrick Brian Knight, known as the Insane Cajun, was born in Slidell, Louisiana. He had a history of legal issues, including a burglary conviction for which he was on probation in 1991. At the age of just 23, he lived next to Walter and Mary Ann Werner near Amarillo, Texas, where ongoing disputes over noise created tension. On August 26, 1991, Knight and Robert Bradfield broke into the Werners' home, holding them captive for over 24 hours. The couple was then tied up, blindfolded, and driven to a remote location where they were forced to kneel before being fatally harmed. Their bodies were left in a ditch. Knight initially denied involvement, but later confessed and led police to the scene. In 1993, he was convicted and sentenced to the highest penalty. In the days leading up to his final sentence, Patrick Knight launched an unusual campaign called Dead Man Laughing. He urged people to send in jokes for him to share in his final moments, hoping to bring humor to an otherwise grim situation. The effort gained traction, and his MySpace page was flooded with thousands of views and over 1,300 jokes. Knight explained his motive simply.
A little bit of laughter is needed. I just want to go out smiling.
But when June 26, 2007 arrived, his final day unfolded with routine precision. He spent time with friends and supporters, keeping up his lighthearted demeanor. Despite planning to tell a joke in his final statement, when the moment came, his tone shifted. Instead of humor, he spoke with conviction, thanking God for his friends and using his last words to express concern for wrongful convictions, naming those he believed were innocent. His voice shook with emotion as he stated,
"Not all of us are innocent, but those are."
He then added,
"This is my fate and I accept it. I am not Patrick Brian Knight and y'all can't stop this now."
He took his last breath at 6:21 p.m. The next case takes an unexpected turn as we look at a man who seemed more upset about his last meal than the horrible acts he committed. Thomas Joseph Grasso was born in 1962 in West Babylon, New York. On December 24, 1990, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he fatally harmed 87-year-old Hilda Johnson and took $12 and her TV. 6 months later, on July 4, 1991, in Staten Island, he targeted 81-year-old Leslie Holtz to steal his Social Security check. Grasso was caught in New York shortly after the incident with Holtz and admitted to both events. He was sentenced to 20 years to life before being extradited to Oklahoma, where he pleaded guilty and received the most severe sentence in 1992. On his final day, Thomas Grasso kept to a routine, watching television, speaking with prison staff, and awaiting the inevitable. But his focus seemed to be on one thing, his last meal. He put in a grand request, a feast fit for indulgence: 2 dozen steamed mussels, 2 dozen steamed clams, a double cheeseburger from Burger King, half a dozen barbecued spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, half a pumpkin pie with whipped cream, diced strawberries, and a can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs. But when the meal arrived, there was one glaring mistake. Instead of SpaghettiOs, he was given plain spaghetti. It was a small detail, but to Grasso it mattered. His frustration over the mix-up would lead to his infamous final words.
I did not get my SpaghettiOs, I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this.
At 12:22 a.m. on March 20th, 1995, Grasso took his final breath at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He did not make any additional final remarks beyond his comment about the SpaghettiOs. The next case brings us to a horrifying situation where the final sentence went terribly wrong. Clayton Lockett was born on November 22, 1975. His early years were filled with hardship and instability. His mother struggled with substance use during her pregnancy, and when Lockett was 3, she abandoned him. On June 3, 1999, Clayton Lockett and 2 others forced their way into a home in Perry, Oklahoma. They took 19-year-old Stephanie Neiman and 2 others against their will. When Stephanie resisted and threatened to report them, Lockett restrained her with duct tape and took her to a remote area. He fired at her not once, but twice. Despite her injuries, his accomplices buried her before she had passed, sealing her tragic fate. Lockett was arrested shortly after the incident. In 2000, he was found guilty. He was sentenced to capital punishment plus 2,285 years in prison. His accomplices received life sentences. His final sentence was scheduled for April 29, 2014. But as the moment approached, Clayton Lockett's fear became evident. That morning, he was found hiding under his bed covers, refusing to cooperate. Lockett's behavior suggested not acceptance, but overwhelming distress and fear. As tensions escalated, authorities took extreme measures. Just hours before the procedure, he was subdued with an electrical device due to non-compliance, a sign of just how tense the situation had become. Afterward, medical staff examined him and deemed him fit for capital punishment. At 6:23 p.m., the process began using an untested drug combination, midazolam, a sedative, vecuronium bromide to prevent movement, potassium chloride to stop the heart. The use of an experimental mix immediately raised ethical concerns. Should different drug combinations be tested on human lives? Lockett's case would later become a haunting example of why this question matters. At 6:33 p.m., the room was still. Clayton Lockett had been declared unconscious. The medical staff, witnesses, and officials in the chamber prepared for what was supposed to be a routine, controlled procedure. But then, something went terribly wrong. A murmur broke the silence.
Oh, man.
The words were faint, but unmistakable. Lockett was moving. His body, expected to be still, began to writhe. His chest heaved, his head shifted, his foot kicked against the restraint. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he tried to lift himself off the gurney. The sentence that should have been swift and clinical had spiraled into a disturbing, chaotic scene. Witnesses sat frozen, some gripping the arms of their chairs, unable to look away. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lockett's face twisted in pain, his muscles tensed, his breathing became ragged. He was struggling, aware, suffering. At 6:56 p.m., officials made the decision to halt the process, but it was too late. At 7:06 p.m., Lockett suffered a fatal heart attack, passing away 43 minutes after the process began. The failed sentence led to widespread criticism and a reevaluation of protocols in Oklahoma and other states. It shed light on the difficulties and ethical concerns surrounding capital punishment, especially regarding the methods used to carry out such sentences. The next case will meet a man who risked everything for freedom, only for his escape to end in a way no one saw coming. This is Martin Edward Gurule, born in 1969, faced difficulties early in life, including losing his mother before his first birthday. Raised by his father and grandmother, he attended W.B. Ray High School in Corpus Christi and later worked at the Corpus Christi State School, where he cared for individuals with intellectual disabilities. His girlfriend, Melissa Smith, was employed at the U&I restaurant in Corpus Christi. On October 12, 1992, Gurule entered the restaurant late at night and was involved in a planned theft that resulted in the unalivement of co-owner Mike Piperis and employee Anthony Staton. In July 1993, he was found guilty and received the most severe penalty, while Smith was sentenced to 25 years. Facing such a future, some individuals take desperate measures. On Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1998, Guru and 6 others took advantage of the more relaxed holiday security. They hid in a recreation room and set up their cells to look occupied by using cushions and sheets. Darkening their prison uniforms with markers to blend into the night, they broke through a door leading to the recreation yard and then forced their way through another barrier. Reaching the main prison yard, they climbed onto a building's roof and waited for complete darkness. Just after midnight, guards spotted the group and responded immediately. 6 of them surrendered right away, but Guru ran about 100 feet across open ground, climbed over a barbed wire fence, ran another 70 feet across a clearing, scaled a second barbed wire fence, and disappeared into the darkness beyond the prison walls, despite guards firing 18 shots. Tracking someone in a situation like this presents major challenges. Law enforcement agencies had to coordinate resources effectively. More than 500 officers, supported by search dogs, boats, and helicopters, were involved in the search. Governor George W. Bush brought in the Texas Rangers and announced a $5,000 reward for any leads. 7 days later, fishermen discovered Guru in a Trinity River tributary near Huntsville. He had a wound on his back and was unable to stay above water, leading to his passing. Investigators believe he jumped into the river to avoid detection by search dogs, but couldn't make it out due to his injury. This escape attempt led to major changes. In March 1999, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice relocated its highest security unit to the Terrell Unit, now the Allen B. Polunsky Unit, in West Livingston, Polk County. Additionally, the Work-Capable program, which allowed certain inmates to move more freely and perform supervised tasks within the prison, was discontinued. But the next case? Oh, his final plans were far more sinister. Charles Rodman Campbell was born in 1954 in Hawaii. On December 11, 1974, Campbell threatened 23-year-old Renee Wickland outside her home in Clearview, Washington, warning that her infant daughter would be harmed if she resisted. She reported the incident, leading to his conviction in 1976 and a 40-year prison sentence. Despite a troubling record, Campbell was placed in a work release program in 1981. On April 14, 1982, seeking revenge for Wickland's testimony, he broke into her home. Inside, he harmed and took the lives of Wickland, her 9-year-old daughter Shanna, and their neighbor Barbara Hendrickson. In November 1982, Campbell was put on trial for the 3 lives he had taken out. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including witness statements that placed him near the scene. Charles Rodman Campbell's final hours were tense and chaotic. On May 26, 1994, the day before his sentence was carried out, officers found him lying motionless on the floor of his cell. When they attempted to check on him, he suddenly lashed out, forcing them to use pepper spray to subdue him. A search of his cell uncovered a sharpened metal object, raising concerns that he may have been planning to harm himself or others. As his final moments approached, Campbell was given the option of a last meal. He was offered a fish dinner, but barely touched it, instead spending his remaining time speaking with his son and a former prison counselor. When the time came for his transfer, Campbell refused to cooperate, lying flat on the floor and refusing to move. Officers attempted to get him up, but he remained unresponsive, forcing them to use pepper spray again. Even after being restrained and placed on a board for transport, he continued to resist, making it difficult for officials to proceed. It took 90 seconds to secure him properly before the process could move forward. He did not have any final words. Pedro Luis Medina was a Cuban refugee who was born in 1957. He arrived in the United States during the 1980 Mariel boat lift, a mass migration that brought about 125,000 Cubans to American shores. Born on October 5, 1957, Medina had a difficult past, including time spent in a Cuban psychiatric hospital where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and major depressive disorder with psychosis. In 1982, Medina was found responsible for the tragic passing of Dorothy James, a 52-year-old schoolteacher from Orlando, Florida. She had been restrained and injured multiple times in her apartment. Medina was discovered sleeping in her car at a rest area along Interstate 10 near Lake City and was taken into custody for unauthorized use of the vehicle. During his trial, Medina denied being responsible for her passing, but admitted to being in her apartment that night and taking her car afterward. Despite his history of mental illness, he was found fit to stand trial, convicted, and sentenced to capital punishment. On March 25, 1997, after 15 years on death row, the 39-year-old Medina was prepared for his sentence at Florida State Prison in Rayford. In the early hours, he was moved to a special holding cell near the designated chamber. Officials conducted final checks to ensure all protocols were followed. Medina was given time to meet with spiritual advisors and legal representatives for final discussions and prayers. As the scheduled time neared, Medina was escorted into the designated chamber and secured into the chair, commonly known as Old Sparky. Witnesses, including media representatives, state officials, and members of the affected family, observed from an adjacent room. At approximately 7 a.m., the procedure began. However, moments after the electrical current was activated, a foot-high flame erupted from the headpiece, filling the room with smoke and a strong odor. The smoke was so thick that some witnesses struggled to breathe, and the flames lasted for several seconds before fading. Despite the unexpected and unsettling turn of events, the process continued. Medina's chest moved several times, leading some to believe he was still conscious. However, medical evaluations confirmed that he had not survived. An autopsy later revealed a severe burn on the crown of his head, which aligned with the malfunction that had occurred during the procedure. Investigations determined that human error was the main cause of the issue. A dry sponge had been placed incorrectly between the wet sponge and the conductive screen in the headpiece, which led to increased resistance and caused the ignition. This incident intensified debates about the reliability and ethics of electrocution, prompting some states to reconsider and eventually transition to alternative methods. Pedro Medina's final 24 hours followed standard procedures, but were ultimately overshadowed by an unsettling and deeply controversial event that reignited discussions on capital punishment in the United States. Carl Panzram was born in 1891 in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, into a family of Prussian immigrants. He was raised on a farm by his parents, John and Matilda Panzram, along with his 5 siblings. From a young age, he showed troubling behavior. By 8 years old, he was already in trouble with the law, arrested for drunkenness and causing disturbances. At 11, he broke into a home, landing him in a reform school where he faced harsh treatment. Instead of rehabilitation, the experience fueled his anger and hardened his outlook on the world, setting the stage for what was to come. Panzram's criminal record was staggering. He claimed responsibility for the passing of 21 individuals, though only 5 could be confirmed. He also admitted to harming over 1,000 individuals in various ways, leaving a trail of destruction wherever he went. He was a relentless thief and arsonist, too. He took pleasure in burning buildings and breaking into homes, including one belonging to none other than former President William Howard Taft, something that, in his mind, carried a special kind of satisfaction. One of his most infamous actions took place in 1920 when he burglarized Taft's residence and stole a large amount of money along with a firearm. With the stolen funds, he purchased a yacht and used it to attract workers with promises of jobs. However, he unalived them and disposed of their bodies in the Hudson River. He openly expressed a deep hatred for humanity, which fueled many of his actions. Panzram's behavior led to multiple prison sentences. In 1928, while serving time at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, he fatally injured a prison staff member using an iron bar. He showed no regret and refused legal assistance. He pleaded guilty and received the maximum penalty. On his final day, Karl Panzram remained as defiant as ever. He rejected a spiritual advisor, refused a special last meal, and chose to eat the same food as the other inmates, showing no interest in final comforts or redemption. As his final sentence neared, his contempt for authority didn't waver. When guards attempted to place a black hood over his head, he spat at the executioner, a final act of defiance. And when asked for any last words, he didn't beg, plead, or express remorse. Instead, he sneered and delivered one last insult.
Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier fool! I could take down a dozen men while you're wasting time.
With those words, Karl Panzram met his fate, unyielding, unrepentant, and just as ruthless as he had lived.